Chapter 1, Section 2, Forms of Government. So, when we're talking about the classic forms of government, there's 8 different types of governments that exist in the world. And after this lesson, you will be able to identify each of those 8. So, the first question is, how do different forms of governments affect citizens' lives? Think about how you have it in the United States right now. Think of all the rights that you have. Think of all the perceived rights you have. And then think about what other people do and do not have in other countries around the world based on the form of government that they have. So let's take a look at the 8 classic forms of government right now. Our first form is a monarchy. And in a monarchy, it's headed by a king or a queen. Now, they believe that their power is inherited from God directly, so that anything that they do or say is a direct reflection of God, and that, of course, God runs through their blood. In an absolute monarchy, the king or queen has total power. So in a monarchy, they can share the power, such as in England, where they share the power with Parliament. Now, Parliament is made up of the House of Lords and the House of Commons. The House of Lords are all members of the royal family, whereas the House of Commons are all people who have ordinary jobs in the public sector. Now, number 2, the constitutional monarchy is based on the idea that there are limits to the rightful power of government over its citizens. So again, if you're in the power, again, let's take our example of a king or a queen, because that's what a monarchy is. The people who are assuming those roles believe that the people must submit to them because they have achieved that power somehow, and therefore the people they relegate themselves to listen. Power of the monarch is limited by law, where the real power lies in another branch of government. And that's my parliament example I gave you in the last section there. And it may coexist with other forms of governments, such as the representative democracy. And again, when we're talking about constitutional monarchy, you're talking about the United Kingdom again, whereas maybe a monarchy, just a single monarch without a parliament, such as the Kingdom of Jordan, there the people only have the king or queen, whereas in United Kingdom it's the king, queen, and parliament. Now, a pure dictator is a person that holds absolute authority and makes all the decisions for their country. Sometimes violence and force are used to maintain the rule. An example of this, of course, would be Cuba under Fidel Castro and now his brother Raul. So a dictator is a single person, and obviously the greatest dictator in the world was, that's correct, Adolf Hitler. And everyone knows the story of Adolf Hitler because you learned it last year in U.S. history. And that leads us to number 4, totalitarian regimes. And in this regime, or in this form of government, a dictator holds the ultimate authority. Government tightly controls all aspects of life, whether it's political, social, or economic, and there's no formal or informal limits on government. If you think closely, who comes to mind? That's right, Kim Jong over in North Korea. So he makes all the decisions. It's not unheard of in Kim Jong Il's or Kim Jong Un in his government that his uncle fell asleep during one of his speeches, and of course, his uncle was met with a terrible death. To set an example to the people, they tied his uncle to an anti aircraft gun and fired it, and of course, they never found him because he was obliterated. So that's the kind of power and rule that these kind of dictators have. Our fifth type of government is an oligarchy or an aristocracy, and this is where a small group of powerful people make most government decisions for their own benefit. Membership in the ruling group may be based on wealth, family, or military power, and this was seen in ancient Greece, Sparta. You could argue that it was seen in Jamestown and maybe even later in the Pilgrim era, where they made those types of decisions based solely on the area which they lived. Um, but again, Greece and Sparta are our two examples that we can have here. Now, number six, a theocracy. This is where rulers claim to represent and be directed by a set of religious principles. Laws are rooted in a particular religion or religious doctrine, and government power is unlimited. So, to look at this, look over in Iran, in which they have an ayatollah and they also have a president. You would think the president had more power than the religious icon, the Ayatollah, but that's not the case. The Ayatollah actually sets all the rules and decisions, and whatever they say goes, regardless if the president agrees or disagrees. Now, of course, in that theocracy, it's religious based, so of course, all our Western traditions, including music, clothing, and lifestyle, is pretty much shunned in Iran. Our seventh form of government is a direct democracy, and that's where the government is by the people. Citizens are the ultimate source of a government authority. Citizens come together to discuss and pass laws and select leaders, and this works best in small communities. My example to you would be ancient Greece or Athens, or it could even be, if you go back to the Articles of Confederation, a form of direct democracy there because the central government didn't have the power that the states had. And so you could argue there that direct democracy was in effect during the Articles of Confederation. Now, our last form of government is a republic or a representative democracy. And this is government by the people, where the citizens are the ultimate source of government authority. And if you go back to this is the United States. We elect our peers to lead us. Whatever, based on whatever qualifications we see in them, they lead us and we follow. And it's an indirect form of democracy in which citizens elect the representatives to make government decisions on their behalf. And the representatives are elected for set terms. So here's an example. The president today is allowed to serve 2 terms. Each term is 4 years, and for a maximum amount of 10 years. But wait a second. If you listen to me, I said 4 year, 1 term. 2 terms would equal 8 years. So how do I say 10 years? And the answer is simple. We allow, if a president were to become incapacitated or die, the vice president to take over. Now, as long as the vice president had 2 or few years left of service, then they're allowed to finish those 2 out as president and then run 2 more times, or at least for 2 more terms, which would, of course, then be 2 plus 4 is 10. So when you see the question on a test, we elect our presidents for 4 years a term. They're allowed up to 10 years, whereas someone like a senator, we elect for 6 years, whereas a representative we elect for 2 years. So there are um, different elected terms. To touch on the types of power that are out there. The first is unitary system, and that's where the ultimate authority rests in a single national government. Then there's the federal system, which divides power over people and territory between a national government and a regional levels of government. And this is an American invention, the federal system. We developed it, or our forefathers developed it. And the last is a confederal system, which are independent states joining forces to form a weak central government. And it states that delegate power to the national government is in a limited manner. So the confederal system, of course, would have been under the Articles. The federal system would be under the Constitution, and we don't practice necessarily a unitary system.